You're about to see Jon Young, founder of 8 Shields Institute, speaking on regenerative community design and renewing your creative path at the UCSC Kresge Town Hall on Thursday, January 22, 2015. The event was hosted by the Kresge Common Ground Center, Education for a Just and Sustainable World. For more information, visit kresge.ucsc.edu/common ground.
So let me throw a few things out about connection. The history of Westernization is the history of disconnection. You ever thought about that? You know, the story that they tell in the history books, or they used to tell, because people aren't telling that story as much anymore, because people are kind of like, what? Forget that. You know, basically Westernization occurred for your ancestors in this room, because everybody has this story, or you're going to be in this room. Westernization actually took place not when the sales guy for Western civilization came to talk to the ancestors of your bloodline and said, hey, we got this cool thing called Westernization, you know, and one day there'll be iPhones and, you know, we'll have like really cool cars and, you know, we'll even have things that run on electricity that we can drive around, and it's going to be great, and it's going to be really interesting. You'll be able to text people. It's just going to be amazing, right? And, you know, there's all kinds of benefits. You know, we'll have science, and we'll have equality and diversity and all this kind of stuff, and we're all going to get along great, and it's going to be awesome. You guys should sign on, right? So there was no sales force. There was just a military takeover and usually some kind of awful, terrible moment where all the connective practices that your ancestors were operating with were taken away. And do you know why? They just stopped connection and said, we can't have these people be connected anymore. We want them to feel disconnected and disempowered and weak and afraid and confused and untrusting of all the people around them. Why do they do that? What's that? To profit. How?
Through control.
Through control. Basically, you end up with a lot of slaves, essentially. You know, you can pay them, right? But they're still working for you. And this military industrial sort of conquest thing spread all over the world, often with a religion attached to it, you know. And during that period, which, depending on where your lineage is from, it could have happened as recently as 50 years ago, or it could have happened 2,000 or 5,000 years ago. It really just depends. Now, Sir Ken Robinson, do you know that name? And there's another little video you really want to watch by Sir Ken Robinson, which I'm going to give the links to you and you can send them out. Okay, both for slow-mo and this one. He's speaking at a TED conference, and he's talking to everybody there, and watches this 12-year-old girl, I believe, stand on stage and just make everyone cry and everyone get blown away by her power and her hopefulness, but also her message, which is super moving, about the world she's inherited, you know, and what she has to do with her peers to turn things around and make a better world, right? And it was very inspiring and it really blew everybody away, and he was talking about that. He references that in his talk, her speech. And he said, you know, basically, I've talked to a lot of the thinkers and leaders at this TED conference, and I asked them, how do we prepare for the next 10 years? How do we prepare our young people to take over the world in 10, 15 years? Does anybody know, in 15 years, the state of the economy? Does anybody know the state of the environment? Does anybody know the state of social wellness, right? How are we going to be doing socially? How are we going to be doing emotionally, collectively? How are we going to be doing in all these different sectors? And he said that maybe 50 years ago, we could have predicted it. And we could have put people in school and taught them to be ready for it. But now, no experts know where those trends are going. And in 15 years, the world, nobody knows what's going to happen. And so he said, what's the only fair way to prepare children for that? And he basically said, we have to turn them all into geniuses. So he said. And he said, we have to awaken their genius. We can't use, you know, what he was more or less calling a factory farm model to prepare industrial revolution, you know, economic human parts to plug into a system that doesn't even exist anymore, right? So he was really referencing the need for a revolution in education and calling for something really different. So as it turns out, I believe Ken Robinson is right, and immediately the thought pops into a lot of heads in the room, well, geniuses, hello, they're born that way. But guess what? Everybody's born a genius. And all the research shows that children in kindergarten have a lot of genius qualities. And by 8th grade, they've diminished down to a small percentage of the people. And by the time they finish, secondary school, genius is pretty much gone for most everybody. Genius is a quality that you're born with. And you know what makes it really powerful? You gotta guess this one. What empowers genius?
Imagination. Desire.
Connection! Yee! All right. That's right, connection. So if you set yourself up for connection in your life design going forward, you will awaken your own genius in time. Not the first moment you do it, but it really comes down to what you're saying, If I'm in touch, or what you're saying about knowing yourself, right? If I'm in touch with who I really am in the moment, then I'm feeling everything around me. And when I feel everything around me, I have many more resources intellectually, but also in my ability to sense and move and to make the right decisions in each moment. You own the moment. Owning the moment is a powerful thing. If everybody in our world owned the moment, the world would go into peace. Because to own the moment means you're also empathetic. You have your connection with nature there. Owning that moment, being in full connection, means that you're happy. It means that you're vital. You have more electricity in your body. That is, you really have the energy to do stuff, right? You're excited to do stuff. Being connected also means that you have the ability to sit quietly when another person is talking to you about something that matters to them. And you're able to be an ear for them, which allows them to work things out within themselves. How many people would like more of that in their life? Yeah, that's huge. That's such a missing commodity in our world. If you have that, and you're like, well, I got a lot of that in my life, then you're blessed, and make sure you take care of those friendships, because you should keep those for your life. That will be one of the most important resources you have for your life. And the other one is, as they said, empathy, which comes from connection with all the natural world. And then the other one is that you will know your gift, you'll know your power, you'll know what you need to bring in the world, who you are, why you were born, what gives you meaning. You'll actually be in your gift. And that's a useful thing for all the rest of us, right? I have a gift to share with you, but it isn't for me. The gift that I cultivated within myself, which was always there, shines not for me, but for you. And each of you has one of those, or maybe more than one. But it isn't for you. It's for others. And we need each other in that way. We were born, our biology, our ergonomic design is set up for interdependence, not isolated loneliness. We're not really designed to be pillars of solitude. We're designed to be interdependent beings. Our whole nervous system is set up that way, right? But that was taken in that moment of Westernization. So I think we could make the Western world really cool by bringing connection back, because it isn't at odds with anything. Do you see that? To be happy, to be vital, to be able to listen to others, to be connected, to be helpful, these are not at odds with Western life at all. They come along fine. It's just like restoring something that was taken from our nervous system. The next piece is being fully alive, loving each moment and treasuring it, knowing that life is a gift. And that really brings in this really deep humility and causes you to really work in a good way, not only for the people right around you, but you'll do things like think forward for the future generations and think about how you can help the world be a better place for them. And the other two attributes of connection are a compassionate heart, ability to love and forgive, which is key, as well as a quiet mind. And if you have a quiet mind, then your creativity will flow through you much more easily. You'll have better skills for design and creating the things that are needed in your lifetime. Those are the attributes of genius, and they're all linked to connection. So my background, my specialty is studying cultures that connect very effectively, lifting out the models of connection and testing them in other communities until we figure out best practices for a non-ideological, non-secular, non-religious, non-philosophical connection system that reaches all human beings. Because I believe Ken Robinson's right, and connection is a vehicle to get us there, right? So the other thing is, and I think one of you pointed that out already, if you're alive and vital and creative, your academic abilities are going to rise much faster too. You'll be a really sharp student, so to speak, right? You'll also be a leader, because those are all leadership attributes that I just listed for you. So if you look at that document that Dave gave you, Renewal of Creative Path, it has an unlikely source. I mean, it goes way back. We found it in 4 different cultures. I think it's written about in there, right? That this process was used. And in modern world, we have something like Renewal of Creative Path. We call it New Year's resolutions, right? I'm gonna give up butter! Yeah! 2015, no more butter! You know, and that's sort of the root of it. You know, that New Year's resolution used to be much more thoughtful and much more process-oriented. In the community I work with in Anahola, Hawaii, they have a very interesting process called makahiki, where they break out in small family groups, and they do a very similar process to what's in that document, and they just talk about how to guide their family and their community forward in the next year. What worked to make us more connected? What caused us to be less connected? How can we reduce the impact of disconnected things and increase the power of connected things? And that's really what that whole document is about. Why? Because if you're connected and you figure that out, you guys will be powerful. And personally, you know, I'm 54. I'd like to leave the world to you, knowing you're powerful. That would help me rest. Right at the end of my life, if I looked around and saw a bunch of you guys rocking the attributes of connection, I'd be like, okay, cool, we got some leaders out there that are going to know how to turn it, you know, how to turn things. So we're also in a time which maybe Dave's talked about, maybe he hasn't. The Great Turning, have you guys talked about that? A little bit. So there's a lot of people around the world who are, you know, cultural thinkers who are looking at trends in the world, and they're talking about this thing that we're in right now, this period of history that we're in right now, and they're calling it the Great Turning. You know, it's sort of waking up from a bad dream and realizing there's a lot of systems in place that we don't need anymore because they're not good for us, they're not good for the environment, and they're definitely not going to be good for the future generations. And there's a lot of millions of people worldwide working independently through their own creativity, almost as if they're all on the same team. And I do hope you'll share with them Blessed Unrest by Paul Hawken. He tracks 230-something thousand of these organizations that have formed from people finding their own creativity, getting connected, and becoming empowered with their own creative leadership. And they started all these movements around the world, and they're growing up from the tracks and the sidewalk everywhere around the world, every culture, every community, every walk of life, every demographic. This stuff is emerging. And it's as if they all went to the same program because they have a value statement. If you read their value statements one against the other, it's like they're all like telepathically connected, right? And he believes it's the Earth's immune system working through the force inside of us known as creativity and guiding our leadership towards a better future. I happen to think that's as good a theory as I've ever heard about why everybody who's doing this stuff is totally in sync, right? I think that's pretty cool. And the process that we're sharing with you, Renewal of Creative Path, pulls that to the surface. You know, that's what it's designed for. And then I think, did we link it to the site for that, if you really wanted to build an ideal scene? The website? Yeah. No, there's that. Yeah, Wishcraft. Great, thank you. Good. Yeah, so have fun with that. I mean, you know, we just cracked it open a little bit. Did that feel, obviously Dave said you guys were fighting for more time. So it was obviously interesting to some of you. Anyone gonna feel stoked to finish that? I think that document also talks about working with groups and collaborating. So you might just ignore that part for now, because that was written for people who are already doing community work and leading community groups to share across their discoveries about what's connecting and what's not connecting, and then sharing strategies for strengthening their communities. So if that sort of seems like it doesn't relate to you, you're right. So you can skip that part. You might substitute it with a friend or two. You know, just buddy up with some people and go through the process. And don't rush it either. You know, if it takes you 2 weeks, take 2 weeks. I start usually in November, and I finish sometime in February every year. I go through it every single year. And it's just like a blade sharpener for me. You know, I know my work in the world, I know my path, I know what I'm here to do, because I've been doing this renewal process for now 15 years. And every year I just go back through the process and just sharpen up the things that I didn't see last year. You always learn something, every single year. And I want you to imagine back to a time when that season came, the whole community comes together for a big feast. Special ancestral foods are prepared for that time of year that everybody loves, and they have a big feast. And then one of the great storytellers of the village comes up and tells a good story about the season that's kicking off, the renewal season. And then all the families are all excited, because the moms and dads are going to go home and do this process with their children in each separate household, right? The leaders are going to go with the leaders, and they're going to do the process as leaders. The healers are going to go and do the process as healers. And then over the days, they're going to come back together and share back with each other. But every single person in the village is sharing out what's working for connection and what's causing disconnection. And they're tracking it in multiple ways like that document does. And what's coming out of that, of course, is youth who know their place. And I don't mean that from an authoritarian standpoint. You end up with that, people hitting adulthood knowing fully who they are, fully alive and fully empowered. In other words, they have their genius. Right? Imagine that. Every year I think about that, and I have to kind of duct tape together that experience for myself. But I have children that have grown up this way now. The oldest is 31, the youngest is 5. And they've all grown up with this influence. And they're all very, very bright, very intelligent, very capable, very self-motivated, really, really creative people. And they're all really happy. And they're all really alive. They have those attributes, because I knew that, that society wasn't going to do this for us. There's no department of creativity empowerment, right? Some countries, though, instead of setting themselves up for the kind of economic social structures we did in the U.S., decided instead to set themselves up for happiness. Does anybody know what country I'm talking about? Bhutan. Right? And surprise, guess what? Everybody's happy. You actually have control over that. And you have the ability to influence that. And it lies in connection. It really, truly lies in connection. So know that you have that capability. So that imaginary village that I talked about a long time ago? That village is actually here in the U.S., and it's in a nation that is a nation unto itself within U.S. borders. They have their own passports, and they're the Haudenosaunee, otherwise known as the Iroquois. And this pattern that you're looking at harkens back to the peacemaker of 1,000 years ago, and he basically said, we won't have a real democracy if everyone doesn't find their purpose and their gift. So we have to create community processes that come for that and pull that to the surface. And that, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So those 3 ideas were inspired by the Haudenosaunee through the founding fathers, because Ben Franklin spent 11 years with the Mohawks. He was fluent in Mohawk, and he learned all this from them. And they built a lot of these systems into the U.S. government idea in the Articles of Confederation. As the Declaration of Independence was also highly influenced by the Mohawks. And at the time, the Mohawks were still living their traditional peacemaking ways. And then, of course, a lot of stuff happened in the area where there was a lot of separation stuff that was leveraged by various colonizing forces, and people were made to not trust each other, and there was, all kinds of awful things that happened as a result. In the 1700s, starting in the late 1600s, but into the 1700s and 1800s, and they had to take that whole system underground and pretend they weren't doing it anymore. And they kind of kept it hidden for a while. But they're still there, and they're still doing this. And in the 70s, they came out, and they wrote about it, and they spoke to the United Nations in a unified address, a unified message from Haudenosaunee clan mothers and chiefs, and they spoke to Geneva, and they laid out a unified address. And Dave, that's one of your resources you share, isn't it? Basic Call to Consciousness?
Not yet, but we do have a video of Caitlin telling the story of the Peacemaker's journey.
Okay. So it would be good for you to check out A Basic Call to Consciousness, because it's looking at Westernization from a different point of view. And And it's talking about what it would be like if we all could just get back to being good to each other, you know, learning to be connected again, learning to connect to our earth, learning to connect to ourselves and our families and our friends in a good way, and rebuilding our fabric of trust and hope for the future. And, you know, that all harkens from the peacemaker people, and probably Caitlin spoke to that, the history of our country being founded on peacemaking principles of the Haudenosaunee. But, what is it? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? The pursuit of happiness is interesting. You know, doesn't mean we catch it. Right? And the three principles that the Haudenosaunee talk about are peace, a good message, and unity. Those are the three things that they speak to. The peace part of it comes from being connected. So when you are fully connected, you'll know inner peace, right? The good message, which means when I'm coming from a peaceful place, if I'm going to speak to you, I'm going to choose my best words. And I'm going to imagine the impact my words are going to have on you even before they leave my lips. I'm going to think of my words as having the power to hurt or to heal. Because that's true. That's true for everybody in this room. But we don't know that because we use words kind of like a little bit freely, shall we say, in the modern experience. But there are people in the world who really think about their words and they think about what effect they're going to have, because once words go out, they just keep going. They just echo out into the universe and that vibration just keeps going forever. You know, and words literally can kill people. Words can heal people. You know, and so when you're working with a peacemaking model, you first must have peace in your being, and then you have to choose your words, knowing that the words you're offering are to bring balance between you and another person, so that peace can be strengthened between you, right? That's a commitment. And then the third thing is that if I do that to you, and then you do that back to me, you and I are going to come to unity, because it'll just be a natural thing that's going to fall out of that process, right? And, you know, that's how governance was taught to the Founding Fathers. Like, this is really important that you use this process in your governance so that you only come up with things that don't hurt the future generations, you know? And they kind of ignored some of that and rewrote the articles. There's a really awesome book that lays the Great Law of Peace next to the Articles of Confederation. You can see where they copied exactly and where they changed. And every time they changed, they were taking power away from women and keeping two-thirds majority so they could control and manipulate for special interests. Because a special interest was not born yesterday. A special interest goes back a long way. That's called the U.S. Constitution and the Great Law of Peace. Yeah. And then in the back of it, you'll see a Senate resolution, a copy of an actual U.S. Senate resolution that they were sued by the Haudenosaunee because the Haudenosaunee were teaching Haudenosaunee children, the wrong history. Because these children were learning the truth history from their elders, and then they get to school and they get bad grades for telling the story that they were told. And so they sued the U.S. government on grounds of cruel and unusual sort of punishment for the children, that it was emotionally disturbing to them, you know, and teaching them to mistrust their elders. And they won the lawsuit handily because they kept awesome records. They basically requested in the lawsuit that a Senate resolution be passed to recognize, a House of Representatives resolution to recognize the truth of the story that I'm sharing with you, so that they wouldn't have to tell their children that this is, you know, they could just say, look, your elders are telling you this, look at this resolution. So even if your teachers aren't telling you, here's the resolution, show it to them. and they've done that ever since. And New York State, they also sued New York State, and they won that one too, and they demanded editing rights for that chapter in history. So in New York, the children are taught the truth now of that period of history, and it depends on what history book now you get, whether you get the real story or not. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Like 20% of modern college students know the story as supported by the HR resolution, and then 80% still get this other thing, this other history. It's kind of a little bit challenging to think about, isn't it? My friend Kalani likes to say, that's why they call it his story, right? Because it's his story. And he says, you have to remember all throughout history, the conquerors write the history books. They write the history books. So I'll leave you with that. Just know that peacemaking is at the root of this whole thing, and that maybe through this process, you know, you guys will join the Great Turning, and we'll see a better world. What do you think?